Mr. Miller, thank you so much for being on the show.
You're welcome.
Would you mind sharing how you came to your faith in Christ?
Yeah, going back to 1994, I actually met my wife at that point and had moved to Chicago after meeting her, and we were dating long distance. And she gave me a book called Search for Significance. And I was searching. I didn't really grow up in the church, and wasn't anti-church by any means. Got a little turned off in high school because of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, interestingly enough. And there's a second part to that story, but I was a band guy in high school, right? I was a drum major, and band guys and athletes in high school, you know how that goes. It's not always great. So I kind of got turned off. I'm like, well, if that is what Christians are going to be, then why do I want to do that? So I wasn't totally turned off, but I had a lot of people kind of in my path that, started, sharing their faith. A few doctors, customers that I used to call on. I worked in the biotech industry, but I moved to Chicago, and I was there by myself, new city, new job. And I was really searching, and had people around me talking to me about their faith. My wife was really starting to get involved in her faith in Tulsa. And I started listening to the radio, and probably a pretty boring story at this point, but I think it's gotten recently a little more exciting. So I was listening to Greg Laurie on the radio, and it was a December morning. I'm laying in bed, 6 a.m. in the morning, and he, started doing the prayer to accept Christ in your heart. And I did it right there and then. And, I continued to listen to Greg and his, it wasn't a podcast at that point, it was radio, right? So, and then kind of lost touch a little bit, but then we moved to California, and his church is in California. So we used to go to, and actually we're on the field at Harvest Crusade and so forth. And a lot of people know Greg Laurie at this point, but now, especially in the last few months, because of the Jesus Revolution, right? So that whole story I had heard several times, and it's kind of the pathway that brought me to Christ because of my connection with his ministry. So, yeah.
So how old were you when you got saved?
So I was like 33.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then, were you raised in the church? Were your parents?
Yeah, not really. They weren't anti-church. We were Creasters, Christmas, Easter.
Yep.
And even then, I did go with, there were families around. This is why I think it's really important that, if you have small kids if you see kids that aren't necessarily going to church, it can have quite an influence because there's a lot of seed planting that went on. I always went to Vacation Bible School and involved with kind of kids around me where their parents were involved. And so there was seed planting along the way, but then I was kind of, because of the experience in high school with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and my experience of just feeling like, if they're going to treat me, less than, that's not what I want to be, right? And I think that happens to a lot of people. They get turned off because they see, you are Christ to a lot of people, right? And you're the only Christ that they see. And, that's hard sometimes. But then you also have to be forgiving and know that we live in a fallen world, right?
Yeah.
So now, interesting enough, just to follow that story up. So when my kids started going into middle school, I actually started being an adult leader of FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and was for like 10 years, so
it came full circle.
It came full circle. And it's it's one of those things where it's like, okay, but I was very clear and told that story during, as a leader. And I said, I want to share with you guys what happened to me.
Yes.
And so as you're interacting with people around you in school, know that they're watching, and they're watching you. And I shared that story and how it kind of pushed me away from faith for a while.
So I think that is such an important story that you just shared, because a lot of times people will, for example, say, I'm part of this Christian organization, but then they forget they're representing that organization. And most importantly, you're representing Christianity.
Yes.
So it's almost better to not even say that you are part of this group if you're not going to follow along with the behavior guidelines that have been set.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's unfortunate. It's just, that happens so many times in life where people will hear the gospel and know about Christianity, but then they just run into a rude and really just kind of a jerky person. And they're like, oh, yeah, I'm a Christian too. I don't want anything to do with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of the ichthus bumper sticker thing, right? So, you're driving down the highway and you see somebody drive by with the little fish and the ichthus on there. And you're like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then they cut you off. It's the same thing. And it can happen in the business world too. So my wife and I, we were talking about this week. We, as you know, UBN had a session, a summit, was it a month ago or so? Mm-hmm. And, there were some of the networking things that went on. We, that's how she met you.
Yeah.
And we connected and we followed up with a few people and they either don't follow up back, they don't come back or they say, well, I don't really want to meet with you right now. And it's like, we're kind of shaking our heads going, really? Yeah. So it's a very interesting thing. And I think we all have to be, as Christ followers, very cognizant of the example we set. Because people see us as we behave. They see our behaviors. They often don't hear our words. But the only way they'll hear our words is with our behaviors, right?
Mm-hmm. So remember those bracelets back, I don't know, 20 years ago? What would Jesus do?
Yeah, WWJD.
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of cheesy, but I think there's a lot of truth in it.
Yeah,
I think people forget, like if Christ was sitting next to you, what would you be doing? How would you be behaving? Yeah. And I think sometimes we forget that he is always really in us. Exactly. We're together. We're one. Yeah. But then sometimes we just are forgetful. And I can't say like I'm perfect. There's many times my emotions will overtake my decision making, and I just think backwards and I go, what on earth were you doing?
Oh yeah, I've pulled the log out of my eye several times. And sure enough, as I start thinking about something like that, then I'm like, oh right. And it's almost like the Holy Spirit going, okay, you're not all that, so just remember who's really driving the bus here. It's that's the key. So I think the other flip side of that is we all have to be forgiving and understanding of it, not take it so personally, realize we live in a fallen world. People are people. They aren't perfect. The only perfect human, they crucified him. So, it's that's kind of where we are.
So I have to go back to your story. Yeah. You said it kind of started with your wife?
It did. We met in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And she was kind of searching at that point. And she grew up Catholic and was just trying to find a way to just grow in her faith. She was missing something, didn't know what it was. And she was going to Bible study. And, I would go with her. We oftentimes went to Catholic Mass. I didn't grow up Catholic. But, I started kind of exploring more at that particular point in time. And it just kind of caught some traction with me. And I was like, okay, what am I doing here? I'm at that point 31 years old and just trying to, find out, where am I in my faith? And so, but she played a big role in that. Yeah.
You know how many times I've heard this story?
I know.
I mean, I think that we're recording the 18th episode or something like that. And half of them have said the same thing.
I believe that.
And I'd have to admit, it was very similar for me too.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's by design, right? If we didn't have the amazing women in our lives, we'd be completely lost. Yeah. In every way that you can think of.
There's no doubt. It kind of reminds me of, the first person to see Jesus resurrected was a woman. So, and the men didn't believe her. They were like, come on, you're dreaming, whatever. There you have it, right? So the importance of women in the faith. So.
Absolutely. So tell me more about beForte.
Yeah. So beForte, we've been in business for about 13 years. We're a consulting group that does a lot of a team-based development, strengths-based development, focused on what people do right versus what they do wrong. How do you bring the best out in people? How do you create a work culture that allows people to thrive? And we work on both strengths and mindset, how you show up, mindset you take into any performance situation. All workers are performers, right? Mm-hmm. So at any point in time, we have to be at our best and when it matters most. So that's what we do. And we work with a lot of technology, biotechnology, which is my background, but in a lot of different organizations of different sizes, and work with their teams, their leaders. We work with coaching. There's a lot of coaching that gets talked about in the workplace. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of coaching gets done. Mm. So showing the importance of that and the significance of that, but doing it in a way that isn't just giving advice, which a lot of people think is coaching. It's and focused on what people do right and how you bring the best out of them. So that's what we do.
So you were talking about your background. Do you want to briefly kind of touch on that?
Yeah.
How did you get to the point where you wanted to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah. I don't think the word entrepreneur ever came up in my mind when I was thinking about it. Maybe it should have, right? So I should have thought about all the business issues around being an entrepreneur, right? Because it's not easy. I was in the biotech pharma industry for many years. My first role in that industry was with a Kansas City-based organization called Marion Laboratories, mm-hmm. which is interesting because if you talk to a lot of people that are younger than, let's say, 40, they don't know who Marion Laboratories, they don't know about Marion Laboratories because it doesn't exist anymore, but there's a lot of legacy here from Marion Laboratories. One is the Kauffman Foundation, which is all about entrepreneurship. Ewing Marion Kauffman was a great entrepreneur who started that company in his garage crushing oyster shells to make calcium tablets. That's what he did. And he was an incredible man of the people. I mean, a great leader, created a great culture in the workplace before it was cool to do that, right? And so he had a great organization. And Kansas City's the beneficiary, the Kauffman Stadium, the Royals, the Kauffman Center for Performing Arts, all of that is part of the legacy and much more. And there's actually a great documentary out there on his life. Well, I went from there after about 3 years and then started in a brand new industry at the time. First company in the industry, had never been around. People hadn't really heard of it. It was called biotechnology. And I started with the first biotechnology company in 1988, Genentech, and they were launching a product in the space in cardiovascular. It was a clot buster. So at that point in time, if people had heart attacks, there wasn't a great course of treatment. So we'd give them this product in the emergency department. It would stop their heart attack because heart attacks mostly are caused by clots in the coronary arteries. So launched that product and spent 22 years with Genentech in different roles and senior leadership. And really, so Genentech was also a great environment and culture to work in. And it's consistently number 1 to 5 in Fortune's best places to work in the United States for many, many years, and played a role in that. So that was fun. And I saw what happened when you created an environment where people would thrive, and you looked at what they did right versus what they did wrong. You coached them effectively, and you created an environment where they thrived. And that was so important to me. And I saw the success of it, but I also saw it when it didn't happen. When, as Genentech grew, some new people came in different roles, and sometimes there's a company culture and then there's climate, right? So culture is the overall experience of a company and what you hope to experience, what they talk about, right? Climate is really driven by the local manager or the area manager and the approach that they take. And if that can be very different than culture, and if it is, it can be derailing. And if it's different, that's a challenge. And I experienced that. And through that experience, I was able to say, okay, what do I really do that I really love to do and not get and I had gotten taken out of my game because I always focused on what people did right versus what they did wrong. Was able to kind of have the resilience to get through that. And I just started searching and said, I want to learn more about it. And I never thought I'd go back and get my MBA. I didn't think I needed it, right? So I'm in my 40s now. I'm like, okay, I'm going back to school. All right, that's really fun. We're going back to school. So it was interesting at the time because University of Nebraska and the Gallup organization had a joint MBA program, and it was an executive leadership, and it was all focused on strengths and talents and engaging workplaces. And I'm like, I'm there. So,
and they created the Strengths Finder.
They did. So yeah, Gallup is they were the kind of the creators of Strengths Finder or Strengths Finder 2.0, which many people may have taken that.
Yep.
So I spent a couple of years there studying and really came out of that and was trying to decide what my next move was going to be. Rewind the tape a couple of years, and I had connected with an organization called Intentional Living, Family Life Radio, Dr. Randy Carlson. And once again, my wife said, hey, shaking me, would you like to go to a marriage conference? I'm like, sure, where is it? And she said, it's in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm like, I'm in, right? And she had gotten connected with Dr. Randy because she would sit in the line to pick up our kids from elementary school. And during her sitting in the line, she would listen to his radio program, which was on family and marriage and so forth. So I said, yeah, let's go. So I think maybe 2007, we went to that program and loved it. Totally connected with the intentional living message, which is basically do what Christ wants you find out what Christ wants you to do and do it, right? Corinthians 3:23. So you do that, and I'm like, I totally get this. And at that point in time, I was traveling a lot, had a big area, the Western U.S. I was on the road all the time. My kids were 6, 8, and 10. Mm-hmm. And I had to decide, was I going to be intentional with my life and fast forward the tape 10 years and say, they're now all graduated from high school and going into college, and I missed it. Mm-hmm. And I missed it. Mm-hmm. So I really had to pray about it. We prayed about it. And I made a decision that, you know what, I can't do this. I have to take a different approach. So in 2010, in July, I started beForte. And it doesn't mean I don't travel or didn't, because I did, but not nearly as much as I was. And I got to be there for my kids. I got to coach their teams. I got to be there for my wife. I got to see them grow up. And you just don't get that back, right? And now, 2023, my oldest is 24. My one just graduated from KU, and she's 21. My other one's just in college. I don't regret a minute of it. Did I give up, some of the worldly successes? Maybe. But, eternal treasures, I feel really good about that.
What was your starting position at that first biotech company?
Yeah, I was in sales. I was carrying a bag, calling on emergency departments.
And what was your undergrad in?
So my undergraduate degree is in finance. Yeah.
I had to bring that up because you told me that the other day, and I'm like, wow, that does not go together at all.
It does not. It's funny because when I was in, so this is how much my mind has shifted on this whole topic. So when I was in college, I thought, okay, first I started as a geology major, okay? And back in the day and in the 80s, right, the geology was like, that's a cool thing to do because you can go work for an oil company, right?
Okay.
Which was fine until I got to like really heavy duty physics and calculus and all that. And I'm like, okay, it's not for me. So third year of college, I changed my major to business and started in the business school at Indiana. And I had to do some catch-up work, but I thought, well, okay, so if I get a finance degree and I have a lot of accounting as well, and at that time I was working, you're gonna love this. So I was working in sales, putting myself through college at a waterbed store, okay? You probably do. You remember waterbeds?
Oh, yes, I do. I do.
So they were like big. If you want a real flashback to the 80s, waterbeds will do it, right?
Yes, those are horrible, by the way.
It was interesting because I sold a ton of them, and literally a ton of them. I mean, like tons of them. So, and there were different kinds, right? There were the really wavy kind, which is those are horrible. But then they started coming out with these mattresses that were like, didn't wave so much, and you could get them where they didn't wave at all, and they were then combos and so forth. So we sold a lot of those. But anyway, it's kind of how I put myself through college. And I thought, well, now I have sales experience, I have a finance degree, I have a lot of accounting. I am so well rounded. Okay, my brain totally is not into well rounded anymore. Oftentimes you hear this discussion about, if you're a leader, you should be the well-rounded leader, which experientially I think is fine.
Yeah.
But let's face it, well-rounded leaders they don't exist. They are unicorns. Okay. You can't be great at everything.
Right.
In fact, the best leaders, studies would even show, they have a whole range of strengths and talents that they bring to the table. And they can still be great leaders, and they can all be different. There's no cookie cutter combination of strengths that come into play that make the most effective leaders. What does make the most effective leaders is the awareness that the leaders have around what their strengths are, and they play to those every day.
Oh.
And we talk about that a lot because there's this kind of myth out there of the well-rounded leader, right? It's a total myth. Experientially, maybe, having different experiences, but you can't be great at everything.
No.
So some things you can be okay.
Not enough time.
Yes.
Not enough time in our lifetime.
Exactly.
Speaking of what you just said with being able to focus more on their strengths.
Yeah.
What about Elon Musk? What do you think his strengths are?
Oh, well, I think he has a lot of courage. Mm-hmm. Courage is definitely a strength. He's not afraid. Now, maybe that's because he has a lot of money too, but I think he had that before that because he takes risks. Let's face it. Anybody that's putting rockets into space on their dime, you're taking some risks. Mm-hmm. You have a lot of courage. Obviously, self-confidence is one of his strengths. There's no doubt about it. And I would say enthusiasm as well, because when he gets behind something, he gets really excited about it. Mm-hmm. See, there's a difference between enthusiasm and optimism. Okay. Enthusiasm is, if I believe in it, I get excited and passionate about it. Okay. Optimism is different. Optimism is the Lego movie. Okay. Everything is awesome. Right. So, that's the difference. Right. So, I believe those are probably three of his strengths. Obviously, the other one that stands out to me is creativity. Yeah. Because he just thinks in his mind goes in different places than most people and sees the world differently. And I think that's intriguing to me and always has been about him.
So you've been providing training for sales people for a long time now. Where do you see most people fall short with sales?
Yeah, so we do work with salespeople. I would say most of the work we do is with people who have are customer facing. Okay, so sometimes it's a sales role. Yep. I work with a lot of medical teams who are like the medical specialist for a certain product, field medical teams. So I think a lot of people, if they do fall short, it comes in when they use a strength too much. It's overdone. So whatever it is. So it's unique to the person, right? It's hard to generalize it. So oftentimes we think that weaknesses are our biggest issue, but really they're not, because we navigate around those. For example, so detail orientation is not one of my strengths. Okay. I'm not that guy. I come in here and I look at this and everything is like really in place. I'm like, okay, so this is not how my studio looks. And I was like, which is really okay. I'm like a little, I have a little bit of strengths envy in this detail orientation, right? So I'm getting a little envious. So, but anyway, but that's not, but I kind of navigate around that, right? I focus on my other things, creativity, my strategic mindedness, my enthusiasm. But what if those strengths are used too much, they can actually look more like a weakness. Example, we'll use enthusiasm. Okay. So I had a time, it's going back a couple of years, where I got this rash of phone calls, and it was a manager calling me because they knew me and said, "Hey, I have this person, and man, executive presence is a problem. They were in front of an executive team and they presented something, and man, it was just, you got comp, And almost to the person, after I gave them an assessment looking at their strengths, it wasn't a weakness they had, although it was being coached like that, right? It was a strength being overdone. And in that particular case, it was enthusiasm. They were very passionate. They spent a lot of time developing whatever they were presenting. And they got so excited about it, it's like they weren't being balanced. So that strength overdone started to look like a weakness. And then the feedback you basically get would be, you need to just calm down. Well, for somebody with enthusiasm, that's like saying, I don't understand that.
Stop breathing.
Yes, exactly. Right. Exactly. So there's a really good way to understand if it's a strength overdone versus a weakness, and it's very simple, a listening skill, you're listening to the feedback. So if you get feedback that is unexpectedly negative, okay, almost always it's a strength in overdrive and being overdone. All right. If you get a feedback that's you expect, like if you came to me and you came to my office and like, you kind of need to clean this up a little bit or whatever, I would expect to hear that. That's feedback towards a weaker area. So it's a really easy way to tell. And it's simple to coach. And it's like one of the most powerful coaching techniques that I use with anybody, because 90% of people who are brought to me for coaching, and I have that happen a lot, they're not a weakness, they're working. It's a strength overdone.
Goodness.
Oh, yeah.
I got to pause and review that. So whenever you receive feedback that's unexpected, it's usually because you're overdoing a strength.
That's correct.
And then if it's expected, then
it's a weaker area.
It's a weaker area. You already knew.
You knew it. Yeah.
Wow. So I love that. I never even thought about that.
Yeah.
But going back to the salesperson, what would be the advice just to, what would you tell them to do?
So salespeople come in all shapes and sizes, right? Yeah. And some of them are very tactical. They're very, they get things done. They have their to-do list, their starters, whatever. So a lot of execution strength. Some of them are thinkers and they're solving problems and they're creative in the way they go about it. Other ones are very relational. Everybody thinks all salespeople are relational. No, not true. In fact, persuasiveness is a strength that is in kind of the relational category. And I work with a ton of people, and that's like their shortest, their lowest area of strength is persuasiveness. They sell other ways. I would say one, if we're going to talk about relationship-driven salespeople, is relationship building can go into overdrive. And here's how it happens. They're afraid to ask a customer or afraid to ask whoever their stakeholders are to take a step. And the reason they're afraid is because they might hurt the relationship and they may not get back to see that person, or that person will think, poorly of them. And so what their fear is the relationship, right? So they don't push themselves. Now there's a way to balance that through other strengths and asking questions and checking yourself, so forth. So you can get through it, but you see it all the time. We hear about that all the time. In fact, another framework that we work with is called Level 5, and it's a coaching system and a selling system and kind of customer interaction behavioral. And Level 1 in selling is the professional visitor. So, and we've all seen them, right?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm talking, we get to know you. They know their people. They get to know their people really well, but man, they're not going to push them outside of their comfort zone. See you later. Great to see you.
They never do the ask.
Exactly. So that's Level 1. And, that would be, I would say that person is dealing with overdrive. Okay. And if you came to them, think of this now, if you came to them and said, hey, you need to get to the point a little sooner. You need, that'd be like, you need to, it would feel weird because they're like, I am talking, I am connecting. And, so that would feel a little strange to them. It'd be unexpectedly negative.
Wow. What's Level 2?
So Level 2 is the price peddler. And that's somebody who just sells on price. It's and those are short-lived because, the next person with the lowest price is going to get the business, right? So if you lean only into price, that's a problem.
They turn themselves into a commodity.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
What's Level 3?
So Level 3 is what we call a technical teller. And this is a big trap because, in whether it's anytime you have a customer-facing person, they're usually very highly technically trained or trained in something, right? They've gone through some training on the product.
Yeah.
And so, and if they only get a few minutes with, whoever their stakeholder is, they want to tell all they know, right? So that's what they do. They technically tell. They go in and tell, and they don't ask. So it's a lot of data dumping. And those first 3 levels are what's referred to as scrap and waste. Because there's a lot of activity, but not a lot gets done. I call it activity with no value. And scrap and waste, those you don't have to you can get all that online if you want. You can get all the technical information online.
Right.
You can, get pricing online. You can get friends online, right? So, So, move to real value, you have to be a product consultant and then a value creator. You have to create enough value that people see you as part of their decision process. They don't make decisions without consulting you first. And there are ways to get to that and behaviors.
My next question is going to be, what's 4?
4 is product consultant. So
Consultant. Okay.
So it's kind of the first level of value because you're asking questions. You understand the customer. You understand your product. You're delivering value through the product.
Yeah.
But delivering value, the next level 5, I know that's going to be next, is a value creator. And the value creator is that person who has a deep understanding of a client's business. They understand the model. They strategically can think through it. They bring value at points where the person has pain points and become part of their decision process. You know you've arrived if somebody's calling you saying, hey, we're thinking about this, but we'd really like to have your input. You've now arrived at a level 5. So
So have you heard of a book called To Sell is Human? Daniel Pink.
Daniel Pink.
I think he talks a lot about this.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think he also touches on this myth of that you have to be this extroverted person to be really good in sales. But I can tell you, for me, I'm a bullet point guy, right? I don't need somebody to tell me all the extra little, data points of a product. Usually, I like to do that on my own time. Because the internet gives you all of that. Yeah. And he talks about the importance of, or really that the majority of people are omniverts. So in between introvert and extrovert, and it's just play on that. But like you said, it's not 1972 where the car salesman has all of the data on or all the benefits on the car. Usually the consumer knows more than the salesperson. So the salesperson is there just to kind of facilitate and be the guide and be on their side and not be on the other side.
That's a really good point. I think there's a statistic he uses in that book that if you ask people what they do for a living, 3 out of 12 will say they're a salesperson. All right, so 25%. If you ask them if they influence in their jobs, 9 out of 11 do. So we all play a role in that. And it's odd because in the last few days, I've had this conversation about this particular book around how everybody has is influence. You don't want to be called salespeople. I met with somebody yesterday who was like, our people don't want to be called salespeople. I'm like, okay, that's cool. You don't have to call them salespeople. They're influencers, right? So they do influence. So having an understanding how to bring that influence and make value out of it versus just activity. I think that's the focus of a lot of sales managers and companies, by the way, is what kind of activity are you having? Because activity will definitely lead, if you ring the bell enough times, somebody's going to hear it, right? But activity without value is meaningless.
Because, the first thing that comes to mind is the pipeline, right? Yeah. You have that cone, upside down cone, and they're thinking...
Funnel.
Yeah, the funnel, sorry. So then the top of the funnel, the most or the more that you, more activity equals more conversions. Yeah. You're saying there's a better way.
It's about quality. Activity is almost meaningless sometimes. In some, that's not true in every sales situation, but it's about the quality of interaction that you have. And that's all about behaviors. And behaviors all can be learned, but you have to, or coached. And that's where the difference is made. So show me somebody that has 8, is required to make 8 calls a day, right? or whatever their quota is for calls. If you give me 3 quality ones and maybe out of 8, 2 are okay, or whatever, but give me 3 really good quality calls, take those every time.
Over the 8.
Who knows where they are, scrap and waste. Usually 60% are scrap and waste, and we've confirmed that through, interactions with different sales teams and so forth is about 60% of customer interactions are scrap and waste. Yeah.
So I was checking out your website. So you do the sales training.
Yep.
And then you have kind of a personality test.
So we do, so level 5, I wouldn't call that as a sales training. It's kind of a behavior coaching model, which was developed by John Hoskins, who is a longtime trainer, and I've known him for years. So we do that. We do strengths work. Strength Scope is the tool we use for that, which is basically a tool. It measures what energizes you at work. So it identifies what energizes you, what doesn't, and knowing that helps you engage your skills, your abilities, your learned capabilities, and be able to focus that when you're at your best. In fact, I'll ask you, Bronson, when are you at your best at work?
Well, you mentioned the details, but I really don't want to have to do the details. I don't want to mess with the details. I don't want to have to think about them. I mean, I actually can do that, but it doesn't energize me. I'm more of a dreamer, big picture thinker, problem solver. The creativity side, I really enjoy coming up with new things, new products, new product lines, new services, better ways of doing things, even relationships, making more unique relationships for the business.
This is why I've seen you in coffee shops for the last couple of days.
Right.
So
you actually saw me on my Bible study.
Oh, I wondered about that.
I was meeting some new guys anyways. But
it's still about relationships.
Yeah,
so
it is. 100% it is. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. So we asked that question a lot. I've asked that question actually to thousands of people over the last 13 years. When are you at your best at work? And typically the response, and if you're in a group, people, I let them go. They, the volume comes up in the room. People start inflecting their voices up. They start talking with their hands. All of these things go on, right? And they start talking about it. And I ask, okay, so 3 words, give me 3 words. Tell me 3 words. When you're at your best, how do you feel? 3 words.
Energized, fulfilled, and happy.
Yeah. Yeah. So all these positive oriented words, right? And we talk a lot about what we call the path of possibility versus the path of limitation. And when you're focused on your strengths and what energizes you, and positive emotions and trust and hope and optimism, it kind of leads to this sense of meaningfulness and purpose. But things happen during our day. It can throw us down into the path of limitation, which is a focus on negative emotions, fear, anxiety, mistrust. And people get stuck there. And there's actually a term when people get stuck in that place. It's called learned helplessness. I don't know if you've ever heard that term.
Yep.
So you kind of teach yourself, well, why should I try it again? It's not going to work. So you learn to be helpless. So in order to move out of that path of limitation, you have to kind of lean into your strengths and understand and connect with what energizes you and all those things you just said, right? Because the overlap of what you're good at, your skills, your abilities, talents even, and what energizes you is when you're at your best. Okay, that's different. It's even different than a talent, because you can have things that you're talented or naturally talented that you don't like to do, right? I talk to people all the time about that. So,
yes.
So it's a unique thing. Now, here's my last question on that. So when was the last time somebody asked you when you were last at your best at work?
I don't think anybody's ever asked me that.
That is also the very common response. Thousands of people I've asked. It's the simplest tool, the simplest question to ask at work by a leader, by anybody, really, a peer, that never gets asked. And in fact, I would even say that anybody, and a lot of times when I've worked with organizations, a couple of times they're like, well, the last time you asked me that question, so we'll hear that. And then if you do ask that question, people might look at you a little funny, like this is unusual. But it does, see all those emotions that it pulled out, all those feelings that it pulled out, and you start thinking about when you're at your best and how do you spend more time there and less time in the things that drain the life from you, because that's when you are going to deliver your best performances. So,
would you say that it's describing somebody's core personality?
Personality is a little different. So there are personality assessments and, introvert, extrovert, and all of the stuff we know from Myers-Briggs, which is kind of hard to interpret once you get it, right? So you're like, what is that? So, so personality is a little different than strengths. There is some alignment, but because strengths are more behavior-based. Personality can be too, but I would say personality comes both through kind of not just what's in your DNA, but also how you're, the environment that you're raised in. So the epigenetic side of the DNA. And so it's a combination of both.
Because I really wrestle with this question. And you mentioned the whole kind of, everything's detailed and organized around here. I've always been like that.
Yeah.
And it's just a way that I operate.
Yeah.
Even since I was younger. I remember when I was, my mom brings this story up a lot. I was first day of kindergarten. Woke up early. My bed was all made. I was dressed. I already had my outfit all ready to go.
I love it.
And I was up before they were up. But
that's awesome.
But then with core personality, I start thinking about something called neuroplasticity, right? Which I looked at the definition, And basically, it's the ability of neural networks in the brain to change through growth and reorganization. It is when the brain is rewired to function in some way that differs from how it previously functioned, which then begs the question, can core personality be changed?
It's a good question. I think it changes early in life. The kind of metaphor I like to use around the whole neural pathways and neuroplasticity is a freeway, So as we grow and develop, through through early years and teens, a lot of this happens early. And even research would show that, epigenetics and genetics play a role in that. Certainly our brains have this amazing ability to continue to learn and grow. Oftentimes we have to be intentional about it to make that happen, right? And think of it as like freeways versus side streets, right? So, and dirt roads. So the super highways that you have in your brain are the ones that kind of energize you. You get drawn towards, you get to use a lot. They've developed over time, and it's hard to change those. But you can make off ramps. Okay, you can build an off ramp and take piano lessons if you've never played piano.
Sure.
And do different things. It probably doesn't help if those activities are like totally draining to you. Like for me, the best example I have is, about 6 years ago, I thought, you know what? I really love this mindset stuff. I'm going to go get my PhD, and I'm going to be a researcher, and I want to get a deep PhD in performance psychology, and I love the coursework, and I love all the practical application of it, and all of that. And then a pandemic hit after I started into dissertation work. So I lost my sample, and then I got 3 different chairs, and so on and so forth. And I finally just started going, I don't think I am this guy. I'm not the person to write a dissertation. And it took me almost 6 months to kind of come to that realization. And I was creating lots of new channels, right? I mean, I know how to do the research and I know how to look things up. I can write, but academic writing, no, not my thing. In fact, I remember I had a professor in my MBA program. He said, Mike, what are you? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, are you a scientific practitioner or a practicing scientist? And I said, well, I am not a practicing scientist. I'm a scientist. Everything I do is all evidence-based.
Yeah.
I was raised that way. It was the way I was brought up in the biotech pharma industry, all evidence. You have to have the evidence. It's not the feel-good thing that you're teaching people. It's evidence behind it. And he said, okay, go with that. And I'm like, okay, so PhD work? No, that's practicing scientist. Yeah. So I learned that.
I applaud you for doing that, but there's no way I would even attempt it, I don't think.
No, and it took 6 years, and I just literally finished my coursework with my master's in psychology. So, and I'm fine with that. And I created a lot of great new neural pathways, learning kind of the whys behind behaviors and the cognitive behavioral model, a lot around performance psychology. So I was creating a lot and doing research in different areas like in interruptions and distractions and things like that. And that's awesome. So, and there's a lot of talk out there about having a growth mindset. And I think it's critical. I think people at a certain point, you get kind of in this zone where you're like, I'm comfortable. It's okay.
Yeah.
This is my comfort zone. Shouldn't I be in a comfort zone? Not if you're going to grow.
Right.
You have to get out of your comfort zone. It's how we coach growing strengths. In fact, when we talk about strengths, it's very weird for people to think about things they do really well that they're energized by, and to think about how do you go to the next level. All right. How do you stretch outside of your comfort zone in an area of strength? Because they're like, why would I do that? I got to fix my weakness. All right. Because that's what everybody says to do. Right. Okay. Well, we kind of use a sailboat metaphor here. Right. So let's say if you have a sailboat, do you sail at all?
No.
No, neither do I. I actually have a sailboat and I don't sail. So I do have a sailboat, believe it or not.
Wow.
I bought one. I started sailing and I bought a boat, a little sidebar, and I went to pick up the boat and I thought, okay, this is good. $800 boat, right? So I was up in Topeka and bought the boat from a really nice lady, and I had to transport it. So I was putting down the mast, right? And the mast starts coming down and I'm trying to stop it from hitting the boat. And I stopped it, but thing about it is the thing that gave on me was my bicep tendon in my right arm. It was
ripped?
not. Yeah, it tore my bicep tendon, and I was
that's
like,
terrible.
I was like, and she's like, "Are you okay?" And I looked down. I'm like, "Oh, there's something going on here that's a little different." And she was so nice. She was a farmer from somewhere in the middle of Kansas. And she's like, "I have some essential oils. You think that'll help?" And I'm like, "I don't know if that's going to help right now." So yeah, I tore my bicep. A week later, I'm in surgery. So the $800 sailboat turned into a very expensive yacht, but it's still an it's like $40,000 yacht or where. Anyway, back to the sailboat metaphor. So, so if you have a sailboat and you have holes in the bottom of the boat that are below the water line, what happens?
So if you have so say that again. If
Sailboat.
Yeah.
Holes in the bottom of the boat that are below the water.
Oh, it's going to sink. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll sink, right?
Yeah,
You got to fix those. Okay.
Yeah.
So those are like weaknesses that you may have that are getting in your way. They're tripping you up. You have to fix those. You just can't focus. You have to make sure and fix that, right? You got to meet expectations. Now, let's say you had a hole in the boat that's above the water line. What does that do to your boat?
Nothing.
Yeah, it's not the shiniest part of your boat, right? Doesn't sink you, doesn't affect how fast you go, right? So that's like what we call an acceptable weakness, okay? It's okay. You probably don't want to spend a lot of time or even interested in spending a lot of time doing anything with that. Unfortunately, that is the focus of a lot of, hey, we want to send you to a class. We need to send you to a course. Here's what you need to fix because you're not perfect and we want you to be more close to perfect. That's what happens in development discussions versus strengths. And stretching outside of your comfort zone in an area of strength, that's like the wind in the sails. Okay. That's what moves you forward.
Maybe it's increasing the size of your sail.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe
I love that
increasing
too.
the mass, and
exactly.
the density or the girth of it.
Yeah, or figuring out exactly when it's not lufting, right? I know what lufting is, and I've sailed enough to know what that is, right? You know, sail lufts, you don't go anywhere. If you got the wind full in sail, then you start moving forward. And that's the only thing that moves you forward is focusing in, growing your strengths, having a growth mindset that's focused on your strengths, and being open to that.
But you got to first plug up the ones that might sink you.
If you'd have them, most people don't because they've avoided those. I would say probably 3 to 5% of we have 3 to 5% that get them. Think of the people that work for you. Do they have weaknesses that are really limiting?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Well, they don't have exactly. And I would say that most people don't. They navigate around them usually through their strengths area. And figure out.
Or they might have to go and find another culture that helps them succeed where that weakness is not as much of a weakness.
Right. For example, if I was in an accounting role or something, and I did that, by the way, my first job out of college was not accounting, but it was in a bank. You know why? Because I was a finance major. So I must be in a bank, right?
Right.
That was a totally terrible move. I mean, it was a job at the time out of college, but when they put me, the mistake that they made, so I was so United Way. Are you familiar with United Way? So there's United Way of Kansas City. This was in Columbus, Ohio. And they have loaned executives that they take in who go and basically give speeches on United Way to companies so they can solicit and train solicitors to go out and ask for United Way contributions, right? So I was loaned from the bank for 3 months to United Way campaign. I loved it. I was 23 years old and presenting in front of 200-300 people, 10 managers, leaders, training them how to solicit for United Way contributions that nobody wants to solicit for, right? So, but doing that training, it was awesome. I loved it. And then the first job I had coming back from that was in credit analysis in a cubicle, looking at financial statements all day. No, that's when I figured out this is not my thing. I could do it. I can still do it. I still can read my financials, which was a great side effect of my finance degree. But man, I hated it.
I could talk about this stuff for like 2 more hours.
Yeah, it's fun. Huh?
As we navigate to the end of this episode, my last question is: you mentioned that you were kind of an evidence-based.
Yes.
You approach things with evidence.
Correct.
Kind of an evidence-based approach. So then, how do you? If you have that mindset, if you have that approach, then how does that fit in with being a Christian and becoming a Christian?
Well, obviously, faith is, is a little different, and you have to see it, right? I mean, I have tons of evidence I could show you for, having a faith-driven, Christ-centered life, and lots of evidence when I'm not, and sometimes that's a little more painful, and oftentimes, and we talked a little bit about the tapestry, you don't always see it in the moment, what God is doing in your life. Sometimes it doesn't feel right. Sometimes it's setback. Sometimes it's bad stuff, but he's always working for our good, Romans 8:28. And I've seen it and seen the evidence of it enough, both through personal experiences, family experiences, friend experiences, and tithing experiences even, to know that, there's a lot of evidence to support that God is there. He is with us. We trust him, even when it's like tough, you still have to trust. Yes. And, I think it's even Greg Laurie says a faith that can't be tested can't be trusted. So it's, you have sometimes to have that faith to trust God, that he's with us all the time. And then you look back, and the tapestry, metaphor is, you're looking at the back side of a tapestry. You can't really see the picture. But if you look at the front side, you see the beautiful artwork and artistry that's happened. Even though you didn't see it when it was being made, you see it. And that's kind of like looking back at when God is with you and God has been in my life. So.
And you quoted quite a few times scripture.
Yeah.
And if people, I would say, are looking for evidence, I think it starts with scripture.
For sure.
Dive into the word first.
Yeah.
And then see what happens.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's hard for some people because sometimes, they're reading the Bible that's in the hotel room, right? The King James.
Yeah,
and I love reading the NLT because it reads like a story.
Yep.
And then there's a lot of the study Bible. I don't know if that's what I pick. In fact, for my kids who graduated from college, I spend a year working through a Bible, making my notes in it, and I just delivered one to my daughter and read through it. And I read down at the little cliff notes that are in the bottom that tell about the situation, because I think it's so important to know the context of what's going on in the culture and what was happening at the time, and just to know that it's probably happening now too, because history repeats itself, right?
Yep.
So, work through that and get a Bible that you are comfortable reading and that has a story like 40 verses 1 where it's not our language of today. It's speaking to you and you can read it and go, okay, I kind of get that now. And, but I think that's a challenge for a lot of people. You can listen to the Bible too. I think that's another great way to do it. The Bible app.
So many options nowadays.
It's amazing.
You can get any translation you want. Just download the Bible app.
Yes, exactly. Any translation. And some of them, you can listen to it in your car.
Yep.
Some people like that. It's who does that? One of the great movie voices or somebody does that, the narration. It's like, whoa, you sound like Moses,
Yeah,
So,
I know you're talking about.
Earl, what's his name?
Earl Jones.
Yeah, James Earl Jones. So he, he's like, yes, and here we are in a day, back in the, that type of thing. So you have lots of ways to get to it. I think our responsibility, and I've really felt called lately for this, is how do we share more than we're doing and not keep our faith to ourselves. I think that's so important. People need it right now. They need hope. They need something, and a lot of people searching out there.
Well, they need the Creator.
They do.
Yeah, and that's why I started this podcast. 100%. That's the only reason why.
It's awesome.
Yeah, just especially nowadays, it's just maybe some fogginess.
Yeah.
I think the light needs to be shown a little bit brighter. Break through that fogginess and really just get people to start thinking. I really believe that it does start with scripture, because you get this. I know for me, it's just getting this pull and you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start really understanding the word, I think that's where it really can start transforming your life. And I really lean on, I like commentaries, study Bibles, because if you're just reading it without it, it can be very confusing, especially if you are reading the Old Testament.
Oh yeah.
And not really having a guide of where to start, because then you start to see the bigger picture.
Yes.
But if you just go into one part of the Old Testament and start reading some of the stuff that can be pretty violent, then you might get a little turned off and say, "Oh, this is not for me." No, you gotta see the whole big picture before you make your decision. And my fear is people don't see the big picture. They don't dive deep enough before they make that decision. This is such an important decision in life.
Yeah.
Take it seriously. Just like if you were going to purchase a car.
Yeah.
How many hours do we spend on researching what the car is, or best miles per gallon? What's the best price? Which one's going to be the most fun? Whatever. Can we do that also maybe with our lives? Because it could be one of the best things we've ever done.
No, I agree. And I think that I totally agree with the scripture side of things. Obviously, God speaks to us in many different ways, right? Through prayer, through other people, circumstances. So taking that kind of all into, there are probably people in lives that are, planting seeds. And I think we just, need to do more seed planting and more talking and sharing. And, testimony is about our story. You asked me what my story was at the beginning of this. And, nobody can take that away from me. And nobody can say, well, that that isn't biblical. I'm like, no, it just happened. And I just felt moved to say, Jesus, come into my life. I am a sinner.
Yes.
I know I am. And I just need you. And I need you to be the rock in my life. And man, that didn't happen overnight, right? The Holy Spirit's been working on me ever since then, and still and will do that. And I think that's the other thing is that people think, well, you do cross a line, but that line is kind of it's like having a growth mindset. I mean, I've read the Bible now many times, and I do it for my kids. I've just started a new one for my youngest son. I got 2 years to finish that. I got to do it before that though. But every time I go through it and I write notes, I write something different and I learn something different, and it's situational where I'm at, and I see the perspective different. I'm at a different point in my life, and know that it is a moment, it is a change that can happen in a second. Doesn't take long to bring Christ into your heart, right? But the growth that you make after that, it's a lifetime. So, and I think that's, and it's a good growth too. I think people think, if I do that, well, then I can't do this.
Yeah.
Well, you won't want to,
I was
right?
there. Yeah.
No, so was I.
Yeah.
I was absolutely there.
Yeah.
And I've grown even through that. And the Holy Spirit just puts these things, puts people in your life. It puts nudges on you saying, hey, So anyway.
The veil, I think, is, or even just the lie we're being told, is those things that you feel like you have to give up are going to actually bring you joy and happiness and fulfillment in life. But they actually don't. It's just a lie that we're told, and we think that we give up those things that come along with becoming a Christian. That, I mean, it's actually going to bring you more joy and more happiness once you do give up some of those things. Yes, even though it's painful in the moment, or maybe short term, but at least that's what I've experienced.
Well, and it kind of bringing it back to mindset, I really believe that even this in the last probably 2 to 4 years, and maybe because I'm getting old, I don't know, but the eternal perspective changes your mindset on a lot of things.
Yes.
I mean, I was that guy. How much stuff can I have? Joke about the more toys you have. I was that guy. Then I'm like, these things are getting in my way. And I know that's the Holy Spirit. And it's, and then I know it's because I have an eternal perspective mindset, mindset versus a temporal here and now. So that does change things, I think.
Well, this has been such a great conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for inviting me.
And coming on here. Last but not least, how can people find out more about your business and all the services you provide? Yeah, thanks. So you can go to beForte.com and get in touch with us there. We also have another website that's attached to that too. It's for our new mindset materials called Grow Like a Pro, Mindset Mastery. And you can go to growlikeapro.net and find that website too. Drop me a note, drop me an email, Mike at beForte.com. Happy to connect, touch bases,
and see if we might have something that can help you out be better at what you're already good at.
I might be reaching out.
Give me a ring anytime.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Take care.